My colleague from Indiana was just talking about competitiveness. The question is, how do we compete? What is competitiveness? Well, we have to start with the premise that the private sector is the primary job creator in this country. They're not just the primary job creator, they're the primary innovator. They are the primary source of technological advancement. And that leads to jobs. So the question is, do we want businesses to be attracted to our country, or do we want them to flee our country? That's the question. That's the question of competitiveness. I want to live in an America that is attractive to job creators. You can talk about big business, you can talk about small business, you can talk about mom and pop shops. You don't even have to define each size business. They're all job creators. We've got, in my district, the 2nd District of Arkansas, we've got all sorts of job creators. And I love them all equally. We've got small businesses. We've got Hewlett-Packard. We've got Caterpillar. And they all create jobs. And when businesses look for a home somewhere on this planet, we want them to look at the United States and say, that's where I want to do business. I can do better there. My labor will be rewarded there. The taxes are not so burdensome there. The regulations don't crush my business there. That's where opportunity is. That's the America that we're trying to create. And the gentleman from Indiana referenced some of the conversations he's had with constituents. I have them every day. They come in my office and they say, this agency is not working with me, it's working against me. This part of government is an obstacle. Can you help me? Can you help me break through so that I can just do my business and create jobs and make a living? And that's ultimately the America that we're talking about. Now, since we're talking about competitiveness, and we're talking about jobs, that ultimately, as some of us were talking about earlier, leads us to a conversation about debt. And I think what we've been talking about here over the last few minutes is that the jobs issue is not separate from the debt issue. We have to deal with the debt in order to create an environment in this country that attracts business and where jobs can be created. I want to take just a second here. We've heard a lot about Medicare and about the debt. And I think it's important to emphasize here, as this chart shows, that of our yearly spending, well over half is what we call mandatory spending. That's spending that doesn't have to be renewed every year. Spending that's in the books, in the law. It just happens. And that includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The bad news is, if we do nothing to this big chunk here called Medicare, if we do nothing, Medicare goes bankrupt. This next chart shows that in just a couple of decades, the entire federal budget, at this point right here, the entire federal budget will be consumed by Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. What does all this tell us? Well, it tells us a couple things. Number one, we have to do something to reform our system so that we don't have a crisis. And number two, it tells us that if we don't reform Medicare, it goes away. It no longer exists. I tell folks all the time when they say, well, you're going to try to end Medicare as we know it. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Medicare as we know it ends itself. In just a short number of years, it ends itself. And I say to my friends, when they mention something like that, I say, well, if someone really wanted to harm Medicare, they wouldn't propose a bold reform to save it. They would just quietly do nothing. Because if you quietly do nothing and kick the can a little further down the road, Medicare goes bankrupt. With no action, Medicare goes bankrupt. What would that look like? Well, it would look a lot like the president's plan. Now, I don't believe that the president wants to harm Medicare, but I'm certain that he's failed to take the steps necessary to save it. What would a plan look like that harms Medicare? It would look like the president's plan. A plan, a budget that doubles our debt in 5 and triples it in 10 and does nothing to save Medicare. It's silent on that and on Medicaid and on Social Security. I think the point that you're making is that we first got to identify the problem, and the problem is a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We are spending too much money. We have made promises that the government can't keep. Saying that we just need more revenue is like a gambler sitting at a slot machine saying, I don't have a gambling problem, I just don't have enough money. We have a spending problem, folks, and that's why we have to talk about all of the different programs. And I have been one that has been willing to say, we've got to look at everything at a time like this. I want to yield to my friend from Illinois, but before I do, I want to point one thing out. You mentioned demagoguery. We're trying to responsibly address this spending problem in all parts of the budget, including Medicare. And I just want to run through a couple of attacks, a couple of misrepresentations that I've been hearing, and then I'd like to hear from my colleague from Illinois. But let me point this out. The first thing that I heard was that our plan in the House is a voucher program. That premium support, which is the core of our Medicare reform for those under 55, those 55 and over, no changes, but premium support's the core of those under 55. I stood here on the floor and I said, this is a program much like the one members of Congress have, much like the ones that federal employees have. And a gentleman from the other side of the aisle said, it's a voucher plan. Well, is it or is it not? It's not a voucher plan. You don't have to take my word for it. What's interesting is, back in 1999, President Clinton recognized that we had a Medicare problem, a spending problem within Medicare. So what did President Clinton do? He appointed a Medicare commission. And who led that commission? Well, one of the co-chairs was a Democrat senator from Louisiana, John Breaux. John Breaux was an advocate for something called premium support. So the plan that we're advocating, that we have passed in the House, was not created by a few in a back room last week or a couple of months ago. It's based on something that the Clinton Medicare Commission discussed in 1999. I just want to point this out. This is an excerpt from an op-ed written by Senator Breaux. And he says, quote, "What exactly is a premium support model? And what does my particular version do? Premium support means the government would literally support or pay part of the premium for a defined core package of Medicare benefits." And look at this. This is Democrat Senator Clinton's co-chair of the Medicare Commission. 1999, he says, "This is not a voucher program, but an alternative to the current system. My plan combines the best that the private sector has to offer with the government protections we need to maintain the social safety net." It's pretty clear it's not a voucher program, no matter what you've heard. It's not a voucher program. And I've said repeatedly that it's the type of plan that we have, and others have said, no, that's not true. Well, Senator Breaux thinks it's true. He says, quote, "I've proposed a premium support Medicare plan modeled after the health care plan serving nearly 10 million federal workers, retirees, and their families," end quote. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I ask folks to get the facts. Thank you. I just want to point out that the gentleman from Illinois mentioned some of the nonsense, some of the attacks that the other side have been making on those of us who are trying to save Medicare and responsibly deal with the budget. The Union Leader newspaper took a look at some of the attacks and said, quote, "Ending Medicare, the idea that we're trying to end it, is a big scary lie," end quote. And PolitiFact, which is a website that takes a look at political attacks and sees, it determines how much validity there is, it gave our colleagues on the other side, it gave their attacks the pants on fire rating, as in liar, liar, pants on fire, on their truth-o-meter. So there's a lot of misinformation out there.